Question 63 of Secundus Secundae has to do with vices opposed to distributive justice. And it's really interesting. There's 4 articles in this question, and every single one of them has to do with what's called respect of persons, which is a sin to respect persons, but St. Thomas Aquinas will explain what this is all about. But rather than saying, let's call this question, the sins related to respect of persons, it says vices opposed to distributive justice. And just as a review, distributive justice is compared to commutative justice, which commutative is between one person and another, whereas distributive justice, as the name seems to imply, is when goods are distributed to individuals by the whole, whether it be the government or a city or possibly even a church. When the community at large distributes things to individuals in that community, that would be distributive justice. And so what we're going to see here is in 4 different articles, this whole issue of respect of persons and what exactly that means and how does it relate to the distribution of goods to people within a community. And Article 1 says whether respect of persons is a sin. And I don't know if you've ever heard of this term or not, but he's going to say, yeah, it is. And he'll explain it here, probably better than I can if I try to paraphrase it. He says, respect of persons is opposed to distributive justice. For the equality of distributive justice consists in allotting various things to various persons in proportion to their personal dignity. Now remember before he talked about how it is proportionate and it has to do with positions. So respect of persons isn't necessarily about a position a person holds, it's just who they are. Like you just give it to a person because they're your aunt or uncle or your son. I think that's what he means. Whereas there's no real reason for it. There's no cause. There's no position. There's no earning of it. There's no deserving, I guess you could say. That's what I think respect of persons is. Accordingly, if one considers that personal property by reason of which the thing allotted to a particular person is due to him, this is respect not of person but of the cause. And he gives an example here. He says, for instance, if you promote a man to a professorship on account of his having sufficient knowledge, you consider the due cause, not the person. But if in conferring something to someone, you consider in him not the fact that what you give him is proportionate or due to him, but the fact that he is this particular man. He's Peter, he's Martin. Then there is respect of the person, since you give him something not for some cause that renders him worthy of it, but simply because he is this person. And then he closes out saying, now nothing but sin is opposed to virtue, and therefore respect of persons is a sin. Okay, so the key here is there has to be a cause. There has to be a reason why you're promoting somebody or you're giving an honor to somebody like that. Article 2, whether respect of persons takes place in the dispensation of spiritual goods. All right, so not just temporal goods, but how about spiritual goods? I find this answer interesting. He said respect of persons is a sin insofar as it is contrary to justice, distributive justice in particular. Now, the graver the matter in which justice is transgressed, the more grievous the sin, so that spiritual things being of greater importance than temporal, respect to persons is a more grievous sin in dispensing spiritualities than in dispensing temporalities. And since in is respect of persons when someone is allotted to a something is allotted to a person out of proportion to his deserts, it must be observed that a person's worthiness may be considered in 2 ways. First, simply and absolutely, and in this way, the man who abounds the more in the spiritual gifts of grace is the more worthy. Secondly, in relation to the common good, for it happens at times that the less holy and less learned man may conduce more to the common good, on account of worldly authority or activity or something of the kind. And I'm thinking of maybe somebody who has a temporal position or a king or, and then they get a spiritual authority just because of their temporal authority. I think that's what he's getting at. And then he says, and since the dispensation of spiritualities is directly chiefly to the common good, it follows that in the dispensation of spiritualities, the simply less good are sometimes preferred to the better without respect of persons, just as God sometimes bestows gratuitous graces on the less worthy. You think about some of the people that famously were visited by Our Lady, like Juan Diego or the Shepherd Children of Fatima or Bernadette Subaru. These weren't necessarily the most qualified people. They weren't necessarily the most intelligent or the wealthiest, but they were the ones chosen by God. And I think you could go back into Scripture and see that there wasn't a whole lot particularly, significant or credible about the apostles, but they were the ones chosen. They were fishermen, but they were chosen. So sometimes I think this respect of persons can relate to that if God chooses them, well, that's enough, right? Article 3, whether respect of persons takes place in showing honor and respect. To honor a person is to recognize him as having virtue, wherefore virtue alone is the due cause of a person being honored. I never really thought about it that way. We honor a lot of people these days that don't necessarily have virtue. I mean, think of sports. I mean, I guess there's some virtue there, fortitude, but yeah, anyways, interesting. Now, it is to be observed that a person may be honored not only for his own sake, but also for another's. Thus, princes and prelates, although they be wicked, are honored as standing in God's place and as representing the community over which they are placed. Okay, so they have a position in the country. They don't necessarily have great virtue, but they're representing something else. So too is a fool honored if he stand in God's place or represent the whole community. And in the same way, parents and masters should be honored on account of their having a share of the dignity of God, who is Father and Lord of all. The aged should be honored because old age is a sign of virtue, though the sign fail at times. The rich ought to be honored by reason of their occupying a higher position in the community, but if they be honored merely for their wealth, it will be a sin of respect of persons. Okay, so there's another kind of standard, is that somebody shouldn't be honored simply because they're rich, all right? Maybe how they earn their money might qualify them if they're just superb in business or something like that, but simply having the money is not going to be reason enough. Finally, Article 4, whether the sin of respect of persons takes place in judicial sentences. Okay, judges giving sentences, and can they look at people outside the merit of the case? Well, obviously, Thomas is going to say no. Judgment is an act of virtue inasmuch as the judge restores to the equality of justice those things which may cause an opposite inequality. Now, respect of persons involves a certain inequality insofar as something is allotted to a person out of that proportion to him in which the equality of justice consists. I hope that makes sense. Wherefore, it is evident that judgment is rendered corrupt by respect of persons when it has to do with judicial sentences. That is going to do it for question 63. Remember, there are 170 questions, but I'll tell you what, if you just do one a day and you listen to these, 10-minute videos, you're going to learn the entire Summa in the course of a couple of years. And so we're just going to keep plowing away. And the next one, I think, is about murder. It's quite an interesting topic. So we'll get to that one eventually. Thanks for watching. God bless you.